September 18th, 1944. Near Liège, Belgium. Rain drums steadily against the canvas roof of a converted farmhouse that now serves as a U.S. Army logistics headquarters. The air smells of wet wool, coffee gone cold, and cigarette smoke that never quite clears. Outside, trucks grind past in both directions. GMCs loaded with fuel drums, ammunition crates, rations. Tires chewing at the mud without slowing. Oberstleutnant Hans Bremer, former quartermaster for a German infantry division, shattered during the retreat from Normandy, stands just inside the doorway under guard. His boots are still caked with Belgian mud. His uniform, though stripped of insignia, is neat out of habit. He expects shouting, chaos, officers arguing over shortages that cannot be solved. Instead, he hears typing. Inside the room, American officers sit at long tables covered in clipboards, maps, and neatly stacked forms. Phones ring. are answered. Orders are given in calm, even voices. No one raises their voice. Bremer watches as a young American captain, barely 30, leans over a wall map marked with colored pins and grease pencil lines. The map is Denmar's. Layered, alive. Roads marked by capacity. Bridges annotated with tonnage limits. Arrows indicating flow, not just direction. Third Army's fuel burn rate is up 8%, the captain says matter-of-factly. Weather's costing us time. Reroute 2 convoys south. Push the rest through at night. Someone nods and writes it down. No debate. No panic. Bremer exchanges a glance with another German POW, a former transport officer. The look says the same thing they are both thinking. How are they this calm? Only days earlier, Bremer's own unit had collapsed not from enemy fire, but from logistics failure. Fuel trucks destroyed, rail lines cut, orders changing faster than supplies could move. Officers shouting into dead telephones, demanding miracles from warehouses that no longer existed. When the Americans broke through at Avranches, German logistics had not bent. It had snapped. Now Bremer watches American officers plan for problems that have not yet happened. A major with wire rim glasses flips through a binder thicker than a Bible. If Bastogne gets cut off, he says casually, we'll need to airlift minimum calories and ammo within 48 hours. Weather might block drops. He taps the page. So we're staging extra C-47s now. Bremer stiffens. If Bastogne gets cut off, in the German army, planning stopped at what must not happen. Encirclement, supply loss, delay. Those were failures to be avoided, not scenarios to be prepared for. Here, the Americans speak of them as inevitabilities. Bremer is escorted closer to one of the tables. An American lieutenant colonel notices him watching. You handled supply? The colonel asks, not unkindly. Bremer nods. Infantry Division, Eastern Front, France. The colonel gestures to the map. Then you know what this looks like. Bremer hesitates. It looks finished, as if the battle has already been fought. The colonel smiles thinly. It has, just not at the front. He taps a road junction on the map. This fails, we lose a day. That fails, we lose a week. So we don't let them fail. Bremer thinks of German supply columns, abandoned for lack of fuel. Of depots overstocked with the wrong ammunition, while frontline units went hungry. Of brilliant operational plans undone by a missing train or a blown bridge. He realizes something unsettling. The Americans are not improvising logistics. They are executing it. Outside, thunder rolls. Trucks continue moving. Headlights hooded. Engines steady. No rush. No hesitation. Bremer watches a clerk calmly stamp a requisition form, while artillery rumbles somewhere far to the east. In the German army, logistics officers had been treated as necessary burdens, Men who reacted after something went wrong, scrambling to repair disasters created elsewhere. Here, they sit at the center of the war. Bremer feels a tightness in his chest that has nothing to do with captivity. He had believed wars were decided by plans, by maneuver, by decisive blows. Standing in that farmhouse, watching calm men move colored pins while armies waited on their decisions, he begins to understand something else entirely. This war is being won by people who assume things will go wrong and prepare anyway. October 3rd, 1944. Somewhere west of Aachen. The map room is quieter here, smaller, closer to the front. The walls are brick, the windows sandbagged, the light dimmed to a perpetual dusk. Outside, artillery thumps with irregular rhythm. Inside, the sound is pencils moving across paper. Oberstleutnant Hans Bremer has been here for 3 days now, assigned to a POW work detail translating captured German supply documents. It is clerical work, lists of depots, fuel allocations, rail schedules that no longer matter. But the proximity gives him something he never expected. A front-row seat to American logistics under pressure. At mid-morning, an aide enters briskly and hands a note to Colonel Richard H. Mallory, the senior logistics officer for the sector. Mallory reads it once, nods, and places it on the table without comment. "What is it?" someone asks. "Bridge at Stolberg went down," Mallory replies calmly. "Delayed convoy by 6 hours." Bremer braces himself, expecting anger, accusations, orders barked into phones. None come. Mallory reaches for a folder already marked Stolberg. He opens it to a page Bremer glimpses in passing. Alternate crossings, load limits, pre-allocated engineer units. "All right," Mallory says. "Shift traffic to Route Baker. Call engineers anyway. We'll want that bridge back tomorrow." That's it. No drama. Bremer cannot stop himself. "You had this ready?" he asks, careful with his English. Mallory looks at him for a long moment, then nods. "That bridge was always going to get hit, either by you or by us." Bremer swallows. In the German army, bridges were defended until lost, and only then discussed. Engineers waited for orders that arrived too late. By the time replacements were planned, the front had moved, the opportunity gone. Here, destruction is treated as a phase, not a surprise. That afternoon, Bremer sits with another prisoner, Major Klaus Reinhardt, formerly a Corps supply officer. They watch trucks roll past in columns that never quite stop. Day, night, rain, fog. Reinhardt shakes his head slowly. "We planned for success," he says quietly. "They planned for friction." The word lingers. Friction, Clausewitz's word. The accumulation of small failures that grind grand plans into dust. The Americans, Bremer realizes, have made friction their starting point. A young American lieutenant enters with a clipboard. "Sir, 3rd Battalion burned through more artillery rounds than projected. We'll need resupply by tonight." Mallory doesn't look up. They always do on first contact. Divert from reserve stack C. The lieutenant hesitates. "That'll leave us thin if the counterattack comes." Mallory finally looks up. "It will come," he says. "That's why reserve stack D exists." Bremer's pen pauses mid-translation. Reserve stack. In the German system, reserves were political decisions, argued over, rationed, often withheld until it was too late. Every ton of fuel, every shell, had been fought for within the bureaucracy. Here, reserves seem assumed. Later that evening, air raid sirens wail briefly. A few bombs fall miles away. The logistics room barely pauses. Bremer thinks of the summer of 1944, when Allied air power smashed German rail yards, of frantic meetings, of officers promising Hitler that supply would continue, while knowing it would not. German logistics had been reactive by necessity. The system was too rigid to adapt quickly. Rail-bound, centralized, dependent on perfection. American logistics, Bremer now sees, is designed for damage. Road-based, redundant, decentralized. If one route fails, another opens. If one depot burns, another feeds the front. Mallory stands near the map again, moving pins almost idly. "We'll outrun our supply if we're not careful," someone remarks. Mallory nods. "Then we'll slow down, or build the supply forward faster." Bremer thinks of German panzer units halting in Russia, not because the enemy stopped them, but because fuel did. He remembers the desperation of watching opportunity evaporate while waiting for trains that never arrived. Here the Americans talk as if supply is elastic. Not infinite, but responsive. That night, Bremer lies awake in a requisitioned barn, artillery flashing faintly on the horizon. He replays the day in his mind. No shouting, no panic, only systems absorbing shock. He realizes the most unsettling difference of all. The American logistics officers are calm because they trust their own assumptions. They assume delays. They assume losses. They assume mistakes. And because they assume them, they plan around them. German planners, Bremer knows, assumed competence, speed, and decisive outcomes. When those assumptions failed, everything else followed. Bremer turns onto his December 19th, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. Snow falls in heavy, wet sheets, muffling sound and turning the world into shades of grey. The roads leading into Bastogne are clogged, not with traffic, but with silence. German armour has closed the ring. The town is surrounded. Oberstleutnant Hans Bremer hears the news second-hand from an American sergeant passing the barn where POW clerks are quartered. "Looks like the boys in Bastogne are cut off." Bremer sits up slowly. Cut off. In the German army, that word carried finality. Encirclement meant collapse unless relief arrived quickly, and relief rarely did. He expects urgency now. Tension, rushed planning. Instead, when he is escorted back to the logistics center later that day, he finds the same calm. Maps have changed. Pins have shifted. That is all. Colonel Mallory stands with a mug of coffee, steam curling upward as if mocking the cold outside. "All right," he says, addressing the room. "We're assuming ground routes are closed for at least 72 hours, possibly longer." No one gasps. "We'll feed them from the air," Mallory continues. "Ammo first, then medical, then food. Weather's bad, so expect losses." Bremer's breath catches. Expect losses. In his experience, German planning avoided acknowledging loss until it happened, and then scrambled to explain it away. Here, loss is treated as a line item. A captain raises a hand. "If the weather doesn't break," Mallory nods. "Then we fly anyway, and if that fails, we ration. They know how to stretch." He taps the map. They were stocked for this. Bremer steps closer, unable to stop himself. "You planned for encirclement?" he asks quietly. Mallory looks at him evenly. "Any unit that advances fast enough risks it." That night, the first C-47's attempt drops through cloud and flak. Some supplies miss the mark. Some aircraft turn back. Some are lost. The next morning, the logistics room updates its boards. Losses recorded. Adjustments made. No recriminations. Bremer thinks back to Stalingrad. To Luftwaffe officers promising that airlift would sustain an entire army, on paper. To planes freezing on runways, fuel running out. Pilots flying impossible schedules until exhaustion broke men and machines alike. The difference, he realizes, is scale and honesty. The Americans never promised miracles. They promised effort and contingency. As the days pass, Bastogne holds, not because supply is perfect, but because it is enough. Bremer watches as American clerks calmly process requisitions, knowing full well that some will never arrive. They plan for redundancy, for waste, for error. German logistics, by contrast, had been built on precision, trains scheduled to the minute, fuel calculated to the litre, ammunition distributed just in time. It looked efficient until one bomb fell, until one bridge failed, until one assumption proved false. On December 26th, Patton's tanks break through to Bastogne. The encirclement ends. Cheers ripple through the logistics room, but briefly. Then work resumes. Bremer sits heavily on a crate, the weight of realization settling fully now. German officers had believed logistics was a servant of operations. The Americans have made it the backbone. Later that week, Bremer speaks quietly with Reinhardt again. They were never calm because they didn't care, Reinhardt says. They were calm because they knew what came next. Bremer nods. Calm is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of preparation. As winter grinds on, German units continue to fracture, not always from defeat, but from exhaustion and lack. Fuel shortages, ammunition gaps, medical collapse. American units push forward unevenly, sometimes messily, but they keep moving. Because when something breaks, the system bends instead of shattering. Bremer writes nothing down. There is no report to file, no superior who would listen. But he knows now that the war was not decided only in Normandy or the Ardennes. It was decided years earlier in planning rooms where someone asked, "What happens when this goes wrong?" and refused to accept silence as an answer. March 7th, 1945, near the Rhine, Remagen. The river is swollen and grey, moving fast under a sky that looks ready to break apart at any moment. Smoke drifts across the water in uneven sheets, rising from shattered buildings along the far bank. Somewhere ahead, artillery cracks in short, sharp bursts. Oberstleutnant Hans Bremer stands with a group of other German prisoners on a muddy hillside overlooking the river when the rumor reaches them. The Americans have crossed. Bremer does not believe it at first. The Rhine is not just a river. It is a symbol, a final barrier spoken of in staff meetings with a reverence bordering on superstition. German doctrine had treated it as a line behind which order could be restored. Then he sees it with his own eyes, an intact bridge. American engineers swarm over it like ants, cables and planks already in place, traffic flowing in both directions. Tanks roll east, trucks follow. Fuelers, ambulances, ammo carriers, everything moving at once, without pause. Bremer feels something close to vertigo. In the German army, a breakthrough of this kind would have triggered days of argument. Whose responsibility? Which unit would supply it? Where fuel would come from? Whether the advance should halt until logistics caught up. Here, logistics has already crossed. Later that day, Bremer is escorted to yet another American headquarters, this one hastily established in a factory whose windows have been blown out and replaced with canvas. The same rhythm greets him. Them greets, maps, tables, coffee. Calm. A logistics officer points to a grease pencil line extending eastward from the Rhine. "If they exploit fast, they'll outrun us," someone says. "Then we move the depots," comes the reply. Bremer almost laughs. Move the depots. In Germany, depots were fixed points, rail hubs, warehouses tied to infrastructure that took months to build and days to abandon. Moving them was an admission of defeat. For the Americans, depots are temporary by design. That night, Bremer speaks with an American major who once studied in Berlin before the war. The man listens patiently as Bremer finally voices what has been forming in his mind for months. "In our army," Bremer says, "we waited for certainty, orders, perfect information." The major nods. "And when you didn't have it?" Bremer exhales. "We froze." The major gestures towards the sound of trucks grinding through the darkness. "We don't wait for certainty. We assume it's wrong. Bremer understands now why American logistics officers never look surprised, why they speak in probabilities instead of promises. German logistics had been built for a war that went according to plan. American logistics was built for a war that never would. In April, as Allied columns surge deep into Germany, Bremer sees the final proof. American units advance unevenly, some faster, some slower. But none stop entirely. When bridges are blown, pontoon bridges appear. When roads are cratered, engineers reroute traffic overnight. When depots empty, new ones materialize closer to the front. Nothing is perfect. Everything continues. German units, by contrast, disintegrate in pockets, not always under direct attack, but stranded by lack, fuel gone, ammunition mismatched, food exhausted. Brilliant defensive plans collapse because trucks never arrive. Bremer watches a German column surrender without firing a shot, engines silent, fuel tanks dry. He thinks back to that farmhouse near Liège, to colored pins and quiet voices. He realizes the truth too late to change anything. The Americans were calm because they never believed control was permanent. Only motion, only adaptation. When the war ends weeks later, Bremer will sit in a camp and replay these moments again and again. He will realize that the most dangerous American weapon was not artillery or tanks. It was the refusal to be surprised by failure. May 9th, 1945, southern Germany. The guns are silent. For Oberstleutnant Hans Bremer, the quiet is more unsettling than the chaos ever was. He stands in a former Wehrmacht depot, now under American control, watching soldiers inventory supplies with the same calm efficiency he has observed for months. Crates are opened, counted, resealed. Forms are filled. Trucks arrive and depart on schedule. The war is over, and yet the system does not stop. Bremer had expected celebration, disorder, relief spilling into carelessness. That is how wars had always ended in his imagination, discipline dissolving the moment the enemy surrendered. Instead, American logistics officers treat victory like another phase. Demobilization schedules are already posted. Units are being rotated home according to priority lists drawn up long before Germany collapsed. Excess equipment is marked for redistribution, storage, or destruction. Food supplies are redirected to displaced civilians. Medical units shift focus without missing a beat. Nothing feels improvised. Bremer sits at a rough wooden table, filling out a final POW processing form with a young American lieutenant who looks more tired than triumphant. "You a supply?" the lieutenant asks casually. "Yes," Bremer replies. "For many years." The lieutenant nods. "Hard job?" Bremer almost smiles at the understatement. "What will you do now?" Bremer asks. The lieutenant shrugs. "Same thing. Different scale. Japan's still going." That sentence lands harder than any artillery round. Different scale, not different nature. Bremer thinks of German logistics officers he once knew. Brilliant men who could calculate fuel consumption to the decimal, who knew every rail line in Europe, every warehouse by heart. They had not lacked intelligence. They had lacked margin. In the German system, logistics had been treated as a fragile extension of success. It worked beautifully when everything went right. It collapsed when anything went wrong. The American system, Bremer now understands, assumes wrongness from the start, assumes trucks will be lost, assumes bridges will fall, assumes plans will break, and because of that assumption, it survives contact with reality. Later, Bremer is allowed to walk briefly outside the camp under supervision. He watches a long column of American trucks roll past on a highway that only weeks ago carried refugees and retreating German units. The trucks are not elegant. They are not fast. They are not impressive. They are there, always there, He remembers a conversation from months earlier, in the Ardennes, when an American colonel had said something that seemed trivial at the time. "We don't win by being perfect. We win by still working tomorrow." Bremer had dismissed it then as casual confidence. Now he recognizes it as doctrine. In German staff culture, admitting uncertainty had been weakness. Plans were presented as certainties, deviations treated as failures of will or execution. In American planning, uncertainty was the foundation. You did not ask if something would go wrong. You asked how much and how soon, and then you built around it. Bremer thinks of the officers he served under, men who demanded calm from their subordinates while quietly panicking themselves, because the system gave them no room to adapt once assumptions collapsed. The Americans, by contrast, never needed to panic. They had already budgeted for disaster. That evening, as the sun sets behind a line of trucks parked nose to tail, Bremer finally understands why American logistics officers always appeared calm, even when maps were bleeding red, even when units were cut off, even when advances stalled. Their calm was not confidence in outcomes. It was confidence in process. They trusted that whatever happened next, the system would bend rather than break. That supplies would flow, even if slower. That units would be fed, even if imperfectly. That movement would continue, even if delayed. German officers had believed war could be controlled through brilliance. American officers had accepted that war was uncontrollable and built something that functioned anyway. Bremer exhales slowly, feeling a weight lift that has nothing to do with captivity. The war, he realizes, was not lost only on the battlefield. It was lost in assumptions made years earlier about perfection, about certainty, about how much chaos a system could endure. The Americans did not fear chaos. They expected it, and that expectation carried them all the way to victory.